Have you ever noticed how some people can be in a room full of friends and still feel like they're standing behind glass? They're laughing, talking, even sharing stories, but there's something about them that feels just slightly out of reach. They're present but not quite there, close but never too close. Here's the paradox. The people who seem most self-sufficient, most comfortable in their independence, are often the ones carrying the deepest hunger for connection. They've just learned to disguise that hunger as preference. So what's really happening in the psychology of someone who keeps everyone at arm's length? You know this person. Maybe you are this person. They're the friend who always listens but rarely shares. The partner who's affectionate but stops short of truly vulnerable. The colleague who's friendly but never quite becomes a friend. They've mastered the art of being simultaneously present and protected. And here's the thing, this isn't about being introverted or enjoying solitude. This is something deeper. This is about building an invisible architecture around yourself, a careful system of emotional airlocks that lets some things in but never everything, never all at once, never deep enough to reach the core. But here's what's fascinating. This didn't start as a choice. It started as a solution. The psychology behind this runs deeper than simple preference. Attachment researchers like John Bowlby discovered that the way we connect or don't connect as adults is profoundly shaped by our earliest experiences of relationships. And for people who keep others at arm's length, somewhere in their history, closeness became complicated. Maybe you learned early that the people who were supposed to be close could also disappear. Physically or emotionally, it doesn't matter. The lesson was the same: distance is safer than dependence, or maybe closeness meant intrusion. Maybe love came with conditions, with expectations that felt like they were erasing you, and you learned that space isn't just comfort, it's survival. It's how you keep yourself intact. Here's what's really happening in your nervous system. You're not avoiding connection, you're managing threat. Because somewhere deep in your psychological wiring, intimacy registers not as safety, but as risk. And this is where it gets complex. You've developed what psychologists might call an avoidant attachment style, but that clinical term doesn't capture the sophisticated emotional engineering you've built. You've learned to control the depth. You share, but you curate. You let people see versions of you, real versions even, but never the whole landscape. You've become an expert at the half-truth, the partial reveal, the story that satisfies without exposing. Control the timing. You reach out on your terms, you respond when you're ready, not to be cruel, but because you need to meter the intensity. Too much closeness too fast feels like drowning, so you regulate the flow like a valve you're constantly adjusting. Control the need. Here's the truth. You've convinced yourself you don't need what you actually desperately want. You've alchemized longing into independence, transformed vulnerability into strength. And it worked, it really did, until it didn't. But the truth is, keeping everyone at arm's length doesn't just protect you. It also isolates you in ways that are hard to articulate. Because here's what happens: people stop reaching. Not because they don't care, but because they've learned the pattern. They've bumped against your boundaries enough times to understand the message: this far, no further. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, they adjust. They match your distance. They mirror your restraint. Research on mirror neurons shows us that we're wired to unconsciously match the emotional availability of the people around us. When you keep your guard up, others learn to guard themselves around you too. It's not rejection, it's adaptation. And maybe you tell yourself this is what you wanted: the space, the freedom, the absence of expectation. But there's a specific kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who don't really know you. It's the loneliness of the hidden self, the homesickness for a connection you've never actually allowed yourself to experience. And this is where it gets interesting. The very thing you're doing to protect yourself from pain, the distance, the control, the careful management of intimacy, is creating a different kind of pain. A quieter one. A pain that doesn't announce itself in dramatic moments, but seeps in during ordinary ones. When something wonderful happens and you don't know who to call. When you're struggling and you've trained yourself so well to be self-sufficient that asking for help feels like speaking a foreign language. You built walls to keep hurt out, but walls don't discriminate. They keep everything out, including the very connection that could actually heal the wound you're protecting. But here's what you need to know: this isn't weakness. This isn't brokenness. This is evidence of your incredible adaptability. You learned to survive in conditions that required you to be self-contained. You developed psychological strategies that served you when closeness wasn't safe. That took intelligence. That took strength. The question isn't whether your defenses were necessary. They probably were. The question is, are they still serving you now? Because maybe keeping people at arm's length was never really about wanting distance. Maybe it was about wanting to control the distance because you'd already experienced what it felt like when other people controlled it. When they left, when they got too close, when they wanted pieces of you that you weren't ready to give. You learned to leave first, to stay distant enough that departure wouldn't devastate, to need less so that disappointment would hurt less. But here's the gentle truth you might be ready to hear. The opposite of distance isn't enmeshment. It's not losing yourself or being swallowed whole. The opposite of distance is something more nuanced. It's chosen closeness. Closeness on your terms, at your pace, with people who have earned the privilege of your trust. You don't have to dismantle all your walls at once. You don't have to become someone who overshares or clings or needs constant reassurance. That's not what healing looks like. Maybe healing looks like letting one person in a little deeper. Maybe it's sharing the story you usually keep private. Maybe it's asking for help once when you'd normally handle it alone. Small experiments in vulnerability. Tiny expansions of trust. Because the arm's length you've maintained so carefully, it was protection, it was survival. It was the best solution you had, but you're not just surviving anymore. And the person who learned to need nothing might be ready to discover what it feels like to need just enough. To let someone close enough to see you. To be known, not just recognized. To stop managing distance and start experiencing presence. That glass wall you've been standing behind, it's not who you are, it's just what you built to survive until you were ready to live. And maybe, just maybe, you're ready now.